The tip of the guard's staff pressed against my throat before I even saw him move. I did not step back. I did not blink. Around me, the throne room of the Vosh Dominion buzzed with silver light and the smell of something like burnt sugar, and every eye in that vast hall was fixed on me, waiting to see if the human would flinch. "Well?" Princess Ilizara's voice cut through the chamber like a blade dragged across glass. "Are all humans this slow, or is this one simply broken?" Laughter rippled through the nobles seated along the curved balconies above us. I kept my eyes forward, on the guard's chest, on the faint tremor in his arm that told me he did not want to be doing this any more than I wanted it done to me. I was not supposed to be here. 3 months earlier I had been sitting in a quiet supply depot on the edge of nowhere, filling out paperwork for a discharge I had already half signed. Now I stood in the middle of an alien court, wearing a uniform pressed for the occasion, representing a species that had been part of the wider galaxy for less than 2 years. Humanity was new, humanity was small, and to the people in this room, humanity was a joke waiting to be told. "Sergeant Ashford will demonstrate," the Chancellor announced, reading from a scroll of polished glass, "the physical capability of the human species, as requested by Her Highness." I almost laughed myself. Not because it was funny, but because it was such a small, petty thing to be afraid of, after everything I had already lived through. What kept my jaw tight was not fear. It was the quiet, cold certainty that this was a test I was allowed to lose, and a test I was not allowed to win too well either. "Proceed," Ilizara said, waving one long-fingered hand as if swatting away an insect. The guard lowered his staff and raised his fists instead, and the crowd leaned forward, hungry for a show. I want to say I was calm because I was brave. The truth is simpler than that. I had stood in worse rooms than this one, rooms where the walls were failing and the air was thick with smoke, and I had walked out of every single one of them. A bored princess and an unhappy guard were not going to be the thing that finally rattled me. The guard came at me with more caution than confidence, testing, the way soldiers do when they respect an opponent they do not understand. I moved just enough to let him miss, then again, then a third time, and each time the laughter in the room grew a little thinner, a little less certain of itself. "Is he going to fight?" someone called down from the balcony, "or just dance around the floor?" I still had not raised my hands. That was when the princess stood. "Enough games," she said, and there was real irritation under the amusement now. The irritation of someone who wanted a joke and was instead getting a question she did not know how to answer. "Press him properly, or I will find a guard who can." The guard's eyes flicked toward me, apologetic in a way his princess would never understand, and he came in once more, faster now, with real intention behind it. I stepped inside the motion instead of away from it, caught his wrist, and turned, using his own weight to bring him gently down to the floor. It was over in less than 2 seconds. He was not hurt. He was simply sitting there, blinking up at the painted ceiling, and the room had gone completely silent. I offered him my hand. After a moment, he took it. The silence did not last long. "A trick," Ilizara said, though the easy mockery had drained out of her voice. "Nothing more than a trick." "Perhaps Her Highness would like to see it again," I said quietly, and regretted it immediately, because her eyes snapped to mine with a sharpness that seemed to lower the temperature of the entire hall. "You dare address me so directly." "I was asked a question," I said. I answered it. I do not think anyone in that room had spoken to her so plainly in her whole life. For a moment I thought she might call for something worse than a wrestling match, and I began quietly counting the exits from that chamber, when the great doors at the far end opened without any announcement at all. That never happened. I did not know it yet, but I understood it from the way every person in the hall, including the princess, went pale and dropped into a bow so quickly it looked as though the air itself had pushed them down. I was the only one left standing, because I did not know the custom, and because some old instinct told me not to kneel to anyone until I understood exactly who they were. The Empress walked into her own throne room like a woman half her apparent age, though I would later learn she was well over 2 centuries old. She wore no crown, no obvious mark of rank, nothing that set her apart except the way every living thing in that hall seemed to shrink slightly the moment she entered. Her gaze swept the room once, taking in the guard still rubbing his wrist, the princess frozen mid-bow, and me, standing where I should not have been standing. Then her eyes landed on my face and did not move. I felt it the way you feel someone staring at you across a crowded room, except heavier, because I could see something shifting behind her expression, some old memory surfacing after a long sleep. "Rise," she said, to no one and to everyone, and the hall slowly obeyed. She crossed the floor toward me, and somewhere in the back of my mind I understood that whatever was about to happen was going to matter far more than a bruised guard or an insulted princess. Your name, she said. Daniel Ashford, I answered. Sergeant, formerly of the 6th Combined Response Unit. Something flickered across her face at the word formerly. It was such a small reaction that I nearly missed it, but I had spent years learning to read faces that did not want to be read, and I caught it. You no longer serve, she said. I was discharged before this posting, I said. This assignment is diplomatic, nothing more. And before that, she said, where did you serve? I hesitated, because the honest answer involved things I had never been permitted to discuss, missions with no official record, places my own government would deny sending anyone if asked directly. I am not able to say, I told her, as gently as I could manage. You do not need to, she said. I already know. The chamber had gone so quiet I could hear my own pulse in my ears. 9 years ago, she said, a research outpost on the edge of contested space came under sudden crisis during a period of unrest within my own family's territory. The building did not survive. Records list no survivors from the lower corridors. I felt something settle cold in my chest, because I remembered that outpost. I remembered the heat of it, the sound of a ceiling giving way above a passage full of frightened people who had no idea what was happening to their world, and I remembered carrying someone out of that passage whose name I never learned, because there had been no time for names, only for getting people through a door before it was too late. There was one survivor no record ever listed, the Empress continued, because the person who carried her out never gave anyone a name, and was gone before she woke. I did not answer. I did not need to. She described him for years afterward, the Empress said. A soldier who was not supposed to be there, wearing no insignia of any known force, who forced open a sealed door with his own hands rather than wait for it to be opened properly, who carried her through smoke that should have stopped him long before he reached her, and who told her, as he set her down outside, that everyone deserved a chance to walk away from a collapsing building, no matter whose child they happened to be. My throat had gone tight because I remembered saying exactly that, to a girl who could not have been older than 16, coughing, frightened, certain she was about to die in a place that was not even supposed to exist on any chart. I did not know who she was, I said quietly. I would not have known. I did not ask. I know, the Empress said. That is precisely why I have never forgotten it. She reached out slowly and touched 2 fingers to a faint line of scar along my jaw, one I had carried so long I no longer noticed it in mirrors. This, she said. You told her a falling beam had done this, moments before you carried her the last distance to safety. It did, I said. I know, she said again, and for the first time since entering the room, her voice was not the voice of an empress at all, but simply the voice of someone remembering what it felt like to be young and afraid, and alive, because a stranger had decided her life mattered more than his own comfort. You are the girl, I said. It was not a question. I was the girl, she said. I am the empress now. But I have never stopped being the girl you carried out of that fire, Sergeant Ashford, and I have spent 9 years wondering whether I would ever have the chance to thank the man who never asked my name before he saved my life. The silence in that hall pressed against my ears. I glanced, without meaning to, toward the princess, who was staring between her mother and me with an expression I can only describe as someone watching solid ground shift beneath her feet. The laughter from earlier felt like it belonged to an entirely different day. Your Grace, the Chancellor began, clearly searching for some way to steady the shape of the ceremony. If this account is accurate, then the honors owed to Sergeant Ashford must be considered at once, and they will be considerable, the Empress said, not unkindly, but with absolute finality. But before I speak of honors, I would like an answer to a different question entirely. She turned, not to me, but to her daughter. You mocked this man, she said. You ordered him struck for the amusement of this court. I did not know, Ilijara said, and for the first time I heard something in her voice that was not arrogance. It was closer to fear. Mother, I did not know who he was. That is the entire point, the Empress said, and her voice, though quiet, seemed to fill the room the way distant thunder fills a valley. You judged him before you knew him. You looked at a species you had already decided was small, and you assumed the individual standing in front of you must be small as well. You did not ask what he had done. You only asked what he looked like while doing it. The princess said nothing. There was nothing left to say. I do not require you to apologize to me, the Empress went on, and this time she looked directly at me. I require you to apologize to him, and mean it, because one day you will hold what I hold, and if you cannot learn the difference between a species and the individuals within it, you will repeat this mistake with someone who is not fortunate enough to forgive it. Ilijara turned to face me, and I watched her search for the right words, the way people do when the easy ones have just been taken away from them. "I am sorry," she said finally. "I judged you before I knew a single true thing about you. That was wrong of me, and I intend to remember it." I did not need the apology. I had faced far worse than laughter in rooms far less comfortable than this one, but I understood why it mattered, not for my sake, but for whoever she would meet after me, wearing a different face and carrying a different unknown history. "Apology accepted," I said, "Your Highness." The Empress studied me a moment longer, then turned to address the room at large, her voice carrying to every balcony and every silent, watching face. "Let it be recorded," she said, "that the species known as human, whom some in this court considered too new and too small to matter, produced a man who entered a collapsing building on a world that was not his own, to save a life he had no reason to value, and asked for nothing in return, not even a name." She turned back to me. "You will remain in this court," she said, "not as an envoy representing a species that must prove itself, but as a guest of the crown, for as long as you wish to stay. Your people no longer need to earn a place at this table. You have already paid that debt in full, though you never once intended to collect on it. I thought of the depot I had nearly stayed behind at, filling out a discharge form because I believed my usefulness had quietly run its course. I thought of the girl in the smoke, the door I had forced open with hands that still ached sometimes on cold mornings, and the years I had spent never knowing what became of her, never expecting to know. "I did not do it to be recognized," I said, and I meant it as plainly as I have ever meant anything. I did it because leaving her there was never something I was willing to accept. That is all it ever was. "I know," the Empress said, and there was something like warmth in her ancient eyes now, something that had not been there when she first walked into the room. "That is precisely why it mattered." The hall remained still for a long moment after that, the kind of stillness that follows something true being spoken aloud in a place used to hearing only careful, calculated words. Word of what had happened spread through the palace faster than any formal announcement could have managed. By the time evening settled over the towers, servants who had barely glanced at me that morning were bowing as I passed, and nobles who had laughed loudest in the throne room now went quiet whenever I entered a corridor. I found none of it comfortable. I had spent my whole career trying not to be noticed, and now I could not walk 20 steps without someone stopping to stare. Ilizara found me on a terrace overlooking the city as the light began to fade, its towers glowing gold and violet against a sky I still did not have proper names for. She stood at a careful distance, hands folded in front of her, none of the sharpness from earlier left in her posture. "I have spoken with my mother," she said. "She told me the rest of it. What happened before you reached her? What it cost you to keep going when the corridor gave way a second time?" "It was a long time ago," I said. "It was not to her," Ilizara said. "She has carried it every day since. I did not understand that, until today. I thought strength meant never needing anyone. I am beginning to see it might mean something else entirely." "It usually does," I said. She studied me for a moment, the way someone studies a puzzle they have just realized they never actually understood. "I judged your whole species by the way you stood still," she said. "I did not think stillness could be a kind of strength." "Sometimes it is the only kind that matters," I said, "knowing when to hold and when to move, and never confusing the two." She nodded slowly, and for the first time since I had arrived in that court, there was no mockery anywhere in her face. Only something careful and thoughtful that had not been there before. Later, once the terrace had emptied and the city lights had settled into their full evening glow, the Empress joined me there, without guards, without ceremony, just a woman looking out over the world she had spent her whole life trying to protect. "You could have told them who you were," she said, "the moment you arrived. It would have spared you the guard, the princess, all of it." "I did not know if you would remember," I said, "and even if you did, I was not certain it would matter. I was not there for a reward 9 years ago, and I was not looking for one today." "That," she said, "is precisely why your people will do well in this galaxy, whether it is ready for you or not." I thought about the discharge papers still sitting unsigned in a drawer on a world that suddenly felt impossibly far away, and for the first time in a long while, I did not feel like a man whose usefulness had quietly run out. I felt instead like someone who had simply been waiting, without knowing it, for the moment his past finally caught up with his present, and found that the debt had never once been forgotten. Below us, the city lights kept rising, one by one, until the whole valley shimmered like something out of a dream I had never expected to be standing inside. Somewhere in that vast, unfamiliar world, a girl who had once been carried out of a burning corridor was now the most powerful person on the entire planet, standing quietly beside the stranger who had never asked for her name, and never once needed to. 3 days later, the guard I had faced in the throne room found me in the palace gardens, where I had taken to walking early, before the courtiers were awake to stare. He carried no staff this time, and no formal posture either. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for not embarrassing me in front of the entire court." "You did nothing wrong," I said. "You were following an order you did not agree with. That takes more restraint than most people ever manage." He seemed surprised by that, as though restraint had never occurred to him as a kind of strength either. "The princess has changed the way she speaks to the household guard," he said. "Since that day, she asks questions now, instead of only giving commands. Some of us think it will not last. I am beginning to think it might. People rarely change all at once," I said. "But sometimes one morning is enough to start them moving in a better direction." He left after that, and I stood alone among the pale, star-shaped flowers that grew nowhere on earth, thinking about how strange it was that a single afternoon of mockery had turned into something neither the princess nor I could have predicted walking into that hall. A message arrived for me that evening, carried by one of the Empress's own attendants rather than through any official channel. It was short, written in careful formal script, and it asked only one thing: whether I would consider training a small member of the household guard, not in combat, but in patience, in knowing when stillness served better than force. I thought about the discharge papers again, still unsigned, still waiting on a world so far away it barely felt real anymore. I thought about a career I had believed was finished, and a species that had been treated, for 2 short years, as though it had nothing left to offer anyone. I wrote back a single line of my own, and sent it before I could second-guess it. I told them I would stay, not because a queen had recognized my face, but because there might be other doors somewhere in this galaxy still waiting to be forced open, and I intended to be standing nearby when the moment came. Outside my window, the twin moons of that world rose slowly over the garden, and for the first time since stepping off the transport that had brought me there, I felt something close to certain that I was exactly where I was supposed to be.